High School principal and teacher. Any Livingstonians here? Morgan MacArthur was his high school English teacher at Livingston, and then when he went to UWC, it was Stanley Ridge, who headed the English department there for many years. And lastly, not really one of his formal teachers, but as you'll see from whom he learned a huge amount, Richard Rive, the writer, who wrote about life in District 6 mainly. But this account of Farred'S book captures only one of two distinct but really interconnected dimensions of the work of self-reflection on his intellectual formation. The second heart, if there is a second heart of this book, is Farred'S philosophical apparatus he constructs that directs his accounts of these four seminal characters to whom he pays homage. And this is where I found the book very difficult. I'm not grounded in philosophy. I struggled, and those of you who have, have philosophical bent, you'd really like the way this book grapples with that dimension. He invents this notion of the perversity of gratitude, which you can see is already quite a strange formulation, following the work of philosophers like Heidegger and deconstructionists like Derrida and Foucault, among many other philosophers and popular culture figures that he draws on, to frame and direct the inquiry into this formative past. Gratitude to these and other teachers is perverse in the sense that apartheid education, designed to make the disenfranchised not think, in fact did for him the exact opposite. It made him think, and it made him think about thinking. In short, perversity of gratitude is a deeply reflective philosophical thank you to these intellectual teachers and institutions who made him who he is today. Just a little bit about Grant Farred. He grew up in Afrikaans-speaking working-class area of Hanover Park, Cape Town. Grant attended Livingston High School in Claremont from 1976 to 1980, and then moved on to the University of Western Cape, where he majored in English and English honours, and thereafter went to do his master's at Columbia and his PhD at Princeton. He's held academic positions at Williams College, Duke, Michigan University, and he's currently Professor of Afrikaner Studies and Research at private Ivy League Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. So quite a trajectory, and I think of June this morning of what it must have taken for him to get there. The book is his 9th book, and just to give you some idea of his other work, the focus and the scope, he writes a book called An Essay for His Son Ezra, Racial Terror in America, a book called The Burden of Over-Representation, Race, Sport, Philosophy and Long-Distance Love. He's really great on popular culture and sport. And the book where I first encountered his work, Midfielder's Moment, Coloured Literature and Culture in Contemporary South Africa. This letter contains a work on 3 so-called coloured writers, Richard Rive, Jennifer Davids, and who is the third one? I forget the third one. But I actually got to know Grant when I was started my first teaching job at Cathkin in Heideveld, and he was a student at Livingston High in Standard 9, I think, at the time. And Livingston put on a one-act play competition, and I directed a little Brecht one-act play at Cathkin. We took it and we competed, and the working class school beat this prestigious kind of elite school, Livingston, at the competition. And Grant was acting in the Livingston play, which is a World War I play. And I sort of met him backstage and realized he had a very sharp and very unusual mind. But off the record, and I won't put this in the paper, his teacher came to speak to me in desperation at one point to say, Grant won't go on stage. Will you please go and talk to him? I'm not sure what's going on. And I started to speak to him, and he was very determined not to go on, and perverse. So in some ways, it's, I think, this sense of perversity as defiant, as oppositional, can be quite a positive attitude in, especially in the conditions of apartheid under which he was schooled. The book then, just to turn to the book, it comprises 4 chapters, one each on Dudley, MacArthur, Ridge and Richard Rive. But these are preceded in the first 30 pages of developing this philosophical apparatus and the concepts and the optic used in looking back at these 4 figures. Thinking is, Farred claims, the primary overarching concept he is interested in. And then, of course, perversity, he looks at and unpacks this concept, and gratitude. He also looks at some other concepts like the dialectic, which he's interested in, something called diaspora in place, and I think he means by that feeling out of place at home, diaspora in place, memory, apartheid, and other concepts. Repetition, the book feels very repetitive in places, but this is a deliberate strategy, he claims, and unpacks this notion of repetition as well. The book's fragmented yet deeply connected structure and perspective, one primarily concerned with the life of the mind, with intellectual life, and it also makes it very difficult to categorize what kind of book is this. It is a series of connected memoir essays. It is a deeply reflective and self-reflective set of tributes. It is a treatise on apartheid and its paradoxical effects. It is, as the endorsement on the cover says, autopoiesis, that is a term borrowed from biology to mean a self-contained, self-created system. So the teachers create him in their likeness, and he recreates the teachers in his likeness. Just like the book's whole thrust about the kind of oppositional education he received under apartheid, the structure of Farred'S latest work does not fit. It defies, somewhat perversely as he would have it, conventional form. As I said, I'm less interested in this philosophical acrobatics part of the book, even though I think they're essential to what he looks at in the characters. As an English teacher myself, and also a product of a similar high school, Harold Cressy, are there any other Cressyites here? Albeit more than a decade earlier than him, the question that I came to the book with enthusiasm was, what was it in these teachers I had as well, like Dudley, who were so formative to him, to me, to countless others? What was it in these teachers? The figure of R.O. Dudley made the deepest imprint on the young Farred'S mind. He traces the genesis of Dudley's very own intellectual formation. And notice the emphasis on intellectual. Mr. Dudley was not only himself a Livingston alum, he belonged to Livingston's first graduation class, and he did so at the age of 15. R.O. had arrived at Livingston from St. Andrew's Mission Station, where his father Samuel was principal. After Livingston, he was head boy at Livingston, and R.O. then entered UCT at 1939 and graduated in 1945, now possessed of a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science degrees, together with a teacher's diploma. However, Farred continues, his status as a teacher who taught thinking was in no way reliant on his institutional accreditation. He was a thinking man, he was an intellectual. I think just as Farred aspires to be. One sees here the emphasis Farred placed on the role of Dudley, and in fact MacArthur and Ridge in different ways, as his English teacher and lecturer, and in different contexts, on making him think exactly the opposite of what apartheid education was designed to do. These teachers not only were excellent in their fields of physics and English, but over and beyond, they were intellectuals who, through what Farred calls oppositional pedagogy, through provocative questioning and intense teaching, they were intensely immersed in what they were teaching, made him think about his here and now, and about, especially in the English canon that was standard, probably still is standard in many ways in curricula, it made him think about worlds beyond the confines of coloured affairs department curricula and ideological ghettoization that was apartheid's mission. He recounts how Dudley walked into, just one example perhaps to texture this, how Dudley walked into one of his English classes that MacArthur was teaching and stopped and asked the class out of the blue, "What is culture?" The class gives the expected answer, defining culture as the classics, Beethoven. And Dudley retorts, "Culture is ordinary." And this question and the unexpected answer only gets fully grasped and answered for Farred himself when he explores his postgraduate studies in the States and his work. He starts working on the Marxist literary theorist Raymond Viljoen, whose book, one of his books, is entitled "What is Culture?" And this question up till today I think is very much part of Farred's scholarship, which he's addressed since then with his expropriation and exploration rather of both high culture and popular culture. Other scholars have written about R.O. Dudley, this looming figure in education, and in fact Mandela approached him in 1994 to be the first Minister of Education. He turned down the offer because Mandela approached him on the grounds of he also needed a coloured minister in the Rainbow Cabinet, and Dudley said, "I'm not a coloured and I'm sorry I cannot take this position." So there have been many others who've written on this outstanding man and a leader of non-racial politics. So he was in political struggle, a leading member of the non-European unity movement, and more recently life president of the new unity movement. Bill Nasson, the historian, in a short essay on Dudley's roles as educator and political resistance leader in his book History Matters, writes about Dudley from a historian's perspective, but also, like Farred, from a more personal one, as he too was a student of Dudley's, who was his class teacher in the mid-60s when he was himself at Livingston. Then Crane Sodin writes in his 2019 book, The Cape Radicals, Intellectual and Political Thought of the New Era Fellowship. He writes about Dudley as a leading figure in the genesis of ideas of hard non-racialism and his resistance to political disenfranchisement, economic exploitation, and his subscription to the idea, and Sodin subscribes Dudley's outlook to his involvement in the Teachers League of South Africa and the non-European unity movement. But reading Nasson's and Sodin's account alongside Farred's about the same figure, one is struck by how all three highlight the formative role the politics associated with the NEU played in Dudley's thinking, his ideas, his notion of what it meant to be a teacher, and in the context of racial oppression. Dudley was a political teacher in the very best sense of that word, political. Though these three accounts are actually very distinct too, in that Sodin's is a sociologist's perspective, Nasson's is a historian, and Farred's is primarily philosophical, because as he says, quoting Hannah Arendt, he's interested in the life of the mind. Like the other two authors, Farred is also tuned to some of the limits of this ideology, this kind of person and thinking that formed him. He points, as in fact do the other two scholars, to, but Farred does so quite delicately and empathetically. He's talking to his heroes and now thinking about their limitations, to the way this NUM thinking valorized English above all other languages, and how this positioned the Afrikaans-speaking students at Livingston as really not quite part of this. And then also, I think what they underthought, Farred doesn't mention this, but Farred also feels out of place, going back to Hanover Park, where many of the other English-speaking students came from, kind of teachers' homes and that kind of thing. So another limit that these scholars point to in this very formative ideology was the underestimation of the looming class distinctions amongst the disenfranchised, which I think now became exacerbated with apartheid, having disappeared. Farred points out that the exceptional education he got under apartheid at Livingston High indeed was not exceptional, in the sense that there were other schools manifesting the same ethos: Harold Cressy, Trafalgar, no Trafalgarians here, South Peninsula High, Athlone High, Belgravia High, Alexander Sinton, where our ex-CEO Noel Daniels and our chair Marcel Golding schooled, those are the names he mentioned. However, I suggest such nodes of excellence under apartheid. There's a discussion I've been having with Leo, my colleague, about these nodes existed far beyond these schools as well. I remember such a node being Fazeka High and Langa High in my time, and many others in other cities, in Port Elizabeth, in Joburg, in Malmesbury, Skoonspruit. There were schools that also were staffed by at least a few teacher intellectuals or political teachers, if you will, who were members of either the TLSA, the Cape African Teachers Association, but also other organizations like the ANC and its allies, those intellectual teachers associated with those resistance groups and others. And this struck me when Kumi Naidu's memoir, Letters to My Mother, just how on him formative influences from his teachers and mentors, political mentors, how formative that was, and these mentors were linked to sectors of the ANC. And strangely enough, even a collaborator at the time that we condemned, Raj Banzi, he also found something that he could be mentored initially from that quarter. Grant, I found it interesting, Kumi's book, his memoir is titled Letters to My Mother, the making of a troublemaker. Grant's perversity of apartheid. So there's something common there that kind of is giving value to being defiant, going against the grain, being a little perverse, making trouble. Richard Rive, the larger-than-life writer associated with short stories and novels set in District 6, is the only one of four to whom Farred pays tribute that was not a formal teacher of his. Farred met Rive in the year and a half before he left for the States in 1989, and when his lecturer Stanley Ridge prompts him to make contact with Rive to find the funding to go to the States. Rive and Farred became good friends, with Rive relishing the young man's attention, and those of you who know Rive will know how he relished the young man's attention, and thirst for ideas about literature and experiences of literary circles in the Cape and in the country and on the continent, because Rive was full of stories of his encounters with local and African writers. Farred writes about Rive already in his first book, Midfielder's Moment, which is where I first came across his work, as I said, as my work was at that time also on Richard Rive. And the other writer that I forgot initially was Arthur Norkie, the Port Elizabeth poet that he writes about. And in Midfielder's Moment, Farred is concerned with, and this is a moment 6 years after 1994, what can we learn from these writers about this, the fissures in the tensions in post-1994 South Africa that were developing, and I think that's the title, Midfielder's Moment, the idea of coloured folk being somewhere midfield. In Perversity of Gratitude, Farred writes about Rive in a less academic way, though, than he did in Midfielder's Moment, but in a more meditative way. I quote, this is Farred, Rive lived for me an intellectual life. He valued books, art, a quiet place to work. Rive lived the joy for me that was found to be in that life, and possibly that life alone. More important, it showed me that it was possible for someone like me to write. I recognize the absolute need to write as a mode of being in the world, and to write is for me is to think. No wonder Richard's favourite Arthur Norkie lines were, for some of us must storm the castles, some define the happenings. In concluding then, this Farred's book to me is a kind of hymnal, a paean, a deeply reflective, scholarly, self-reflective meditation on thanksgiving and triumph. The book makes me think how in our time we are falling behind our task of making students and ourselves in higher and school education think about thinking, and think about the world and the world we're in. Think about the word and the world, the specific and the general, about cultivating our minds in the way we spoke about this morning. Our systems of education become more highly monetized, corporatized, managerial and bureaucratized, a tick box system of education. As this is happening all around us, what is the role for this kind of question that Grant is asking in the book? How is it crowding out thinking? How is it crowding out thinking about thinking? And while I would say to Grant, I think you're raising a crucial question for us, is just how we're doing this, given what's happening. But also that, this is one critical dimension of what we do as teachers. The other is not just mind matters, it's heart matters, it's body matters, and it's soul, tradition, and culture matters. That, all of these we've got to think about and feel and look at. So I'm left at the end of the book by simply asking, how can we in our current age sustain and reinvigorate a culture of critical, intellectual, oppositional, creative, and humanist pedagogy? Thank you.